Today is Thursday, March 5th, 1964. Did Jack Ruby's own words devastate his defense? Lines of hopeful spectators stretch around the courthouse, and the lawyer's bitter fight wages on. Day 2 is in the history books.
I'm Eric Bushman.
And I'm Brandon Birmingham. This is the state of Texas versus Jack Ruby, the original trial of the century. For the second day, lines that wrap all the way around the courthouse began forming 2 hours before the trial start time of 9 a.m. Women, businessmen, attorneys, and retirees all take their places in line. They are accompanied by nearly 200 newsmen covering the historic trial for the whole world. All who enter the courthouse are searched by Sheriff Bill Decker's deputies. A space has been set aside in the anteroom leading into the courtroom for spectators to leave their shopping bags. Apparently, many who come for the trial make side shopping trips to downtown stores. Visitors come from all over the country. In the courtroom, spectators are seated in a first-come basis and ushered into the visitor section. Many stay in their seats during recess in order to keep them. Some take lengthy notes. Meanwhile, newsmen are constantly moving in and out to meet deadlines. Whatever their purpose, all in the court seemed eager to get a first-hand look at history in the making.
After finishing the day yesterday with Detective Jim Lavelle, the man handcuffed to Lee Harvey Oswald, the district attorney, Henry Wade, called Detective L.C. Graves as his first witness this morning, the man flanking Oswald opposite Lavelle. Graves told jurors when he grabbed Ruby's gun in an attempt to disarm him, Ruby was still pulling the trigger. After he wrestled the gun away from Ruby, he found 5 more live rounds in the Colt Cobra. While Graves was on the stand, Melvin Belli picked up the death weapon and aimed it at the courtroom ceiling. He said he was holding it in the same manner Ruby grasped it, with his middle finger around the trigger. Have you ever seen an ex-GI in his right mind shoot one with a claw hand like that? It would be most unusual, Graves replied.
The next 2 witnesses called by prosecutors proved especially damaging to the defense. DPD Officer Archer helped subdue Ruby within the seconds after the killing. He quoted Ruby as saying, and this is from an in-court testimony today, "I hope I killed the son of a bitch." If believed by jurors, then Jack Ruby knew what he was doing, and he was not insane. 3 minutes later, in the elevator ride upstairs to the homicide division, Archer told Ruby, "I think you killed him." According to Archer, Ruby replied, "I intended to shoot him 3 times. When Ruby was stripped and searched several minutes later, Archer recalled for jurors today that Ruby was very coherent. The state's next witness, Dallas Officer McMillan, testified that he was standing in the doorway, feet away from Ruby and Oswald, when he says he heard Ruby say, quote, "You rat son of a bitch, you shot the president," end quote. An instant later, he heard the shot ring out. McMillan then assisted other officers as they took Jack Ruby down the hallway when he also testified today that he heard Ruby say, "I hope I killed this son of a bitch. And you know me, I'm Jack Ruby," end quote. McMillan then relayed to jurors words he heard exchanged by Ruby and Captain Glenn King. While on the way to the jail quarters on the 5th floor, McMillan says that Glenn asked Ruby, "Of all the low-life things that ever happened, why did you do it?" According to McMillan, Ruby replied, "Somebody had to do it, and I knew you guys couldn't do it." Ruby also said, "I intended to shoot him 3 times, but you officers moved too fast. I only got off 1 shot."
The lawyers also bitterly fought over Archer's and McMillan's notes. Belli asked Archer for his report. Archer said he didn't have it. District Attorney Wade told the court that they didn't have the report either. Eventually, a subpoena was issued by the defense for the statements made by the officers in the days immediately following the assassination. The statements were delivered in court but were intercepted by Assistant District Attorney William Alexander and not turned over to Mr. Belli, who repeatedly told the court that he needed the statements for cross-examination and impeachment purposes. After a number of remarks by Belli about not being able to see them, Wade offered McMillan's statements into evidence. Belli roared for a mistrial, claiming that he had not had a chance to read the statements and didn't know what was in them. He wanted the originals brought to court, no copies, saying anything with the originals was as reliable as, quote, Chinese laundry tickets. When Judge Brown didn't allow him to have the originals, Belli asked the court, "What, are we back in the Middle Ages?" Judge Brown replied, "Yes, sir." The verbal sparring between the lawyers was on full display again in the second day of the trial. While Henry Wade was questioning Detective Graves, a man walking at Oswald's left side when the accused assassin was shot by Ruby, Graves showed how he reacted by taking the murder weapon from the hands of Mr. Wade before the jury. When Mr. Wade picked up the murder weapon, defense attorney Joe Tonnahill murmured a complaint as to whether the gun was loaded. Wade heard the comment and said to Tonnahill, "It's not loaded." To which Tonnahill replied, "I don't know whether it's loaded or not." Wade then pointed the gun at the floor and snapped it 3 times. "Let's see if it is," he exclaimed. Jurors in the Jack Ruby case invariably occupy the same seats. Veteran jury watchers have many theories about the significance of juries sitting in the same seats during a trial. To some, it means they are more methodical and more likely to acquit. To others, it means they are rigid rule followers, more likely to convict. The jury watching game continues, but has thus far produced very little in the way of signs. We can see, however, that all 12 jurors have a no-nonsense look on their face. When one of the attorneys or witnesses says something, everyone in the courtroom laughs, everyone except for the 8 men and 4 women in the jury box. There are 2 cigar smokers in the group. Max Causey and Wayman Rose have both lit up stogies. None of the jurors have lit up cigarettes, however. There's one more thing about this jury. They respond to a whistle. After a recess, Court Bailiff Maybra goes to the door behind the judge's bench and whistles. Moments later, the sound of jurors' footsteps are heard on the wooden stairway, and jurors file into the courtroom, in their usual order, of course.
And with that, Day 2 of testimony in the state of Texas versus Jack Ruby has concluded for the day. The jurors remain sequestered as the world braces for Day 3. Word is getting around the courthouse that jurors will be shown the first murder ever caught on live television, the murder of presidential assassin Lee Harvey Oswald. I'm Brandon Birmingham.
And I'm Eric Bushman. This is the state of Texas versus Jack Ruby, the original trial of the century. Join us tomorrow evening.
Let's talk about the bibliography. The transcript of the trial, Jack Ruby, is publicly available online from the Texas State Library and Archives Commission, the Texas Digital Archive, in the Court of Criminal Appeals Centralized Court Case Files Collection. I've used a couple articles from the Dallas Morning News available online. Hugh Ainsworth and Carl Freund wrote, "Police quote Ruby as saying somebody had to do it." That was published on March 6th on page 1. Staff writers for the Dallas Morning News wrote, "Intended 3 shots, officer quotes Ruby." That was published on page 12 on March 6th. And again from the Dallas Times-Herald, available on location at the 6th Floor Museum as donated to them by former Dallas Times-Herald reporter Bob Finley. Jerry Richmond and Bob Finley wrote, "I intended to shoot him 3 times. State ticks off case against Oswald Slayer." That was published March 5th of 64. Jim Lair wrote, "Ruby jury always seated the same way. Spectators wait for trial seats. Cordiality prevails at trial." And Val M. wrote, "Case of the Century." All of those were published in the Dallas Times-Herald on March 5th of 1964.